morning to everyone. I'm going to begin with the goal for this presentation because I know that we all share the very same goal in that we want to ensure that ethical and competent people are selected to fill board positions. Now, even though this is such a highly competitive environment with board positions being few and far between, it's important for us to share our insights and to learn from each other so that we can make sure that the right people are appointed to boards, because we simply just have to improve our current state of governance. But as you've probably experienced, there are a number of barriers and challenges that we faced with. The challenges and barriers are there before you can even get your foot in the door, let alone a seat at the board. So what can we do about this? There are two things. Firstly, we can collectively advocate for change so that the process for appointments are open and transparent and formalized. But this will be a massive undertaking in its own right, and it will require incredibly strong leadership. And secondly, what we can do as individuals is equip ourselves to improve our response to the call for directors when it comes through. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do we actually equip ourselves and be better prepared to secure those board positions. And as Vicky mentioned, our session is based on the findings of a IoD nomination committee report. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please do. There's a lot more information in there than I'll be covering today. I won't go through the detail of the methodology other than to tell you that we surveyed 44 nomination committees, and they were across various sectors. And we asked them questions about their processes. We asked them questions such as, how do you identify new candidates? What are you looking for during that initial screening process? What do you look for during the interview? And so on. And to start with, this is what we found. I'm just trying to change the screen. Vicky, I'm not sure if you'd like to assist with changing the screen because, oh, there we go. Was that you and me? Right, okay. So what we found was that we asked them, what prompts you to start looking for a new board member? And the answer would seem obvious. But it is actually a very important question to ask because we need to ensure that we respond to their reasons properly. And there were 4 top reasons that came through. The reasons being that they may have identified a skills gap, there was rotation or retirement of existing members, which indicates a skills loss, or they needed to improve board diversity, specifically race and gender, and they also mentioned needing specialized skills that might be required for a board committee. So as you can see, apart from race and gender, which I will touch on a bit later, the predominant reason here is associated with the skills gap. And the key takeaway for us is that when the company starts a search, they know exactly what it is they're looking for. There is such a big emphasis on specific skills that they need. And as candidates, we need to determine whether we actually do fill that skills gap before putting in our application. It's very important to bear in mind because when we submit our CVs, they're not necessarily going to HR where there's a number of HR personnel to sift through the CVs or where they have software for automated screening. Instead, it's collated by sometimes the company secretary, and the CVs are then passed on to the nomination committee who need to sift through these CVs. And if we flood their inbox with hundreds of cookie cutter CVs that don't necessarily meet their requirements, then the company's response is to avoid advertising openly. And the survey actually confirmed this. Companies, in fact, don't advertise widely. And we found that less than 10% are advertised through LinkedIn or through the general media or any other means, and that includes the IoD. Okay, I'm just trying to change the screen again. So if they are not advertising the posts, what are they doing? As we suspected, we found that suitable candidates are sourced through the board's current network or through personal recommendations from Exco or other trusted individuals within the inner circle. These are the two main sources of candidates. And of course, the Old Boys Club is definitely alive and well. So if this is how candidates are selected, it seems as though some nomination committees are there to just rubber stamp decisions that have already been taken by other key players. Or even worse, when they have a preferred candidate in mind, they will still call for external applications. And the idea here is to invite external candidates to an interview to ensure that there is a good quota of female candidates or people of color, to show that the company has actually been through the selection process, but none of the candidates were successful, and it was never intended for them to be successful because the preferred candidate has already been pre-selected. So apart from this being an absolute mockery, some companies who behave unprofessionally in this way should not be putting people through the indignity of this kind of interview just to satisfy the requirements of their nomination process. And it is important that we are aware that this does happen, and you can actually spot it when it does. Now, one of the reasons for selecting non-executives from personal networks is that it helps to make the company feel a bit more at ease about who they're appointing. And this is to ensure board fit. Now, board fit is an important issue, and I want to cover it a little bit more just now. But basically, boards want reassurance about a person's character, and we know that this is impossible to gauge off a CV. One of the ways we can resolve this issue for them from our side is we can cultivate professional relationships with people who can provide a character reference and a competency reference when it's called for. So it can't be your friends, it can't be your shopping buddy, it can't be your weekend braai buddy, but a professional relationship with individuals who can remain at arm's length, but can provide a reference at an elevated level of professionalism. So these could be other board members of good standing, for example, but make sure that you've actually worked with them for a while so they can actually attest to your character and your competency, and you're not actually putting them in an awkward situation, an awkward position by asking them to please provide a reference, but they actually don't know you well enough to do so. We then went on to ask companies, what criteria do they use to screen candidates before the interview? In joint first place, we saw that two aspects came through. One was a person's reputation, and the other was the potential conflict of interest. So both of these factors scored very highly. Obviously, the companies are just as concerned as we are about the state of governance that we're being faced with, and they want to weed out candidates that are of questionable character or avoid those that might bring personal or professional business conflicts to the boardroom. So for us, clearly we need to know that some desktop research goes into the candidates before they invite to the interview. Some of the other screening criteria that's in the paper is verification of qualifications, looking at the amount of experience the director has through other directorships, their availability to serve, and this is to make sure the candidate isn't overloaded in their current role and they actually have time to meet those requirements. And then, of course, there's the criminal check, the SIPC check, credit check, SARS compliance, and social media presence. Now, remember, this is the pre-interview screening. So even if these factors are not assessed at this stage, or they may not be ranked highly at this stage, they will at least be addressed during that final selection process. But what I want to draw your attention to here is that it is incredibly important that candidates go through the list of screening categories that are in the paper and ensure that there isn't a blockage somewhere in your profile that could result in your application being rejected. And remember, we're not informed of why we are disqualified. Unless we're shortlisted, we don't hear from the companies at all. So that very same blockage that might be affecting your shortlisting may affect all your applications in the future. So you need to deal with it as soon as possible. Right, let's now talk about the interview itself, who you're going to be faced with, and why is it important to know who's going to be there. We found that the panel is made up mostly of the members of the nomination committee, and of course we would expect this. They might invite external independent specialists to participate. This might be to improve independence if there isn't enough independent non-execs to serve on the committee, or to bring in additional expertise, or maybe to represent other key stakeholder groups. We also found that the chair of the nomination committee is interestingly only there. 52% of the companies indicated that the chair of the committee might be there. So I would always expect them to attend, but it doesn't seem as though they do. Sometimes the chair of the board might be there, or other members of the board. There might be members of the exec present as well. But when you're faced with this panel, the key thing to bear in mind is that this is not a normal job interview, because you are not interviewing for a job at all. The people on the panel are your potential peers. You are an equal at this interview. So you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. So you should feel very confident about your position and view this rather as a discussion instead of an interview. Also, take time to read the room. Is the discussion around a table, or does it look like this picture where you feel as though you're facing a firing squad? Check out who's in the seat of power, who dominates the conversation, who's quiet. Is there that quick and easy banter amongst each other? As I said, these are possibly your future colleagues, and you need to assess whether they are working well together with each other and whether they'll actually work well with you. Something that many candidates forget to do is request the names of all the panelists. And you can do this in advance so that you can Google them, look them up on LinkedIn, look them up in the integrated report of the company as well, so that you're familiar with their names and their faces and what roles they play in the company. This way, you don't feel as though you're actually meeting a bunch of strangers for the very first time, and it'll help to put you at ease. And the company should give you the names of the panelists. I can't think of a single reasonable reason why they wouldn't. If they refuse to reveal the names, I would actually see this as a red flag. Now, at the interview itself, what are they screening for? The first thing they're looking for, which they ranked as number one, was independence. So companies are looking for a non-executive that has no conflict of interest, who can provide an unbiased oversight of management, unbiased decision-making, and definitely no promotion of self-interest. Independence of thought is just as important. So we are saying no to all the yes men. We're saying no to groupthink. These issues. And it sometimes takes courage to voice an opinion that might be completely different from everyone else's, especially during a heated debate. And of course, when you raise these differences, it needs to be done eloquently and calmly and logically, without either being apologetic or overly aggressive. Ranked number 2 is board cultural fit, which I mentioned earlier. When I was starting out, I didn't quite understand the concept of board fit. To my mind, it was like any other professional setting where you work constructively and efficiently towards a certain goal. But as I grew with experience, I realized how important board fit is. And we've seen examples of bad fit. There are those members who just do not read the relevant material, so they're unprepared for the meeting, and they're so completely lost in the discussion that they either keep quiet, or you may have those who are arrogant enough to hold everyone else back whilst all the issues are explained to them. There are also those that spend time texting, or they're catching up on their work on their laptops, or those who are really distracted by the snack table, or those that just sit there nodding, especially when the chair speaks, but they themselves have nothing tangible or valuable to contribute. So board fit is about members having a role to play in having expertise and having perspectives, and they're actually contributing meaningfully to a robust discussion. In other words, the board is made up of highly committed members, is balanced in temperament and in expertise, and it can function like clockwork. So as you know, board meetings are relatively short, the agendas tend to be long, and of course the issues are always big. So there's really no time to waste, and everyone has a role to play. Board fit is also definitely not about becoming friends or buddies. This is a red flag. We find that close relationships between board members may mean that they are cautious about offending or upsetting each other by disagreeing openly in front of the rest of the board on certain issues. Not everyone has the emotional maturity to handle disagreements professionally, especially if there's an expectation that the friendship goes hand in hand with some kind of blind loyalty. Close relationships can also lead to blind trust, and this could be easily misleading. And at worst, we've also seen close relationships that have led to collusion. On the other hand, if all the members subscribe to the same values of respect and transparency and integrity and efficiency and effectiveness and so on, then there is no hidden agendas, there are no undue influence, there's no power struggles, there's no conflict of interest. And we just get on with the work at hand. And that is what good board fit looks like. Ranked number 3 was critical thinking. That's what companies are looking for, is your critical thinkers who have an inquiring mind. They know how to unpack a problem. They know how to look at issues from different perspectives. And they think through the solutions logically. And of course, they're not afraid to ask questions, and they even question their own thinking. So they listen and they learn, they analyze, they interpret, they reflect. And this makes them far more creative and innovative and far more value adding. So we've seen what the top 3 attributes are that are being sought by the interview panel. I just want to touch on some of the other attributes that seem to dominate the top 10. So it's important for us to look at them. And here we find that there is a need to know just what kind of person this candidate is. So while you're busy interacting with a panel, they are using the opportunity to assess interpersonal skills, personality, attitude, emotional maturity, obviously communication skills, and to some extent, leadership skills as well. So this means that we need to be aware of our body language, our choice of words, our tone of voice, and of course, confidence levels, because these all inadvertently speak volumes about us. So while we might think we have great interpersonal skills, other people may not think so. Now, even though you are aware that they are assessing you in this way, don't let this knowledge put you on edge. Instead, focus on listening to the questions and answer based on your experience and all that research that you did on the company and the industry beforehand. Another thing is don't wait to the very end for them to ask you if you have any questions. You should just go ahead and toss in the questions wherever they are appropriate, because this shows that you're actually paying attention to the issues that they're raising. And it also makes it for a discussion rather than a one-sided interview. And you feel so much more comfortable, and you'll find that the process is more enjoyable because the attention shifts to the issues rather than just focusing on interrogating you. And this gives you a really great opportunity for you to show how you can add value. And just outside the top 10 attributes, gender was ranked at number 11 and race was number 13. But remember, as I mentioned earlier, this is also the third most important reason why a company will begin their non-executive search, because they are looking to improve their gender and racial diversity. When it comes to gender, companies indicated that women of color are highly sought after, but they're difficult to find. So, and of course, they're going to be difficult to find if you have a very limited search area. So companies need to broaden their scope beyond their current social circles and their inner circles, and they definitely need to look outside the old boys club if they're going to look for female candidates. When it comes to race, again, the search area needs to be reconsidered, and reconsidered also from a political point of view. Not just politically well-connected individuals or celebrities need to be sought out. Now, if they have the skills and the knowledge and all the other criteria to serve on a board as a board member, then great, companies should go for it. But otherwise, celebrity and political connections are just not enough for what we want, and what we want is good governance. And there's something else that's being assessed during the interview, which is the candidate's motive for applying for the post. Now, 77% of the companies are actually assessing whether someone is looking for extra remuneration or whether they're looking to improve their social standing or their prestige through this appointment. Remuneration is important for the time and the expertise that we give and for the risk that is being taken. But it cannot be the sole driver for applying for a non-executive post, especially if the person is going to be financially dependent on this as a source of income. There is a real concern that financial dependence may prevent a person from thinking and acting independently because they are afraid to lose that remuneration. If someone is looking for prestige, that is also a problem because it eventually leads to disinterest, non-attendance of meetings, and ultimately it becomes a burden to the rest of the board. The bottom line here is that none of us should be looking for a job. We should not be looking for additional income on which we are dependent, and we should not be looking to improve our social standing. But rather, we should be looking for positions where we can provide leadership, we can provide stewardship, and importantly, for which we can actually be held accountable. Right, now I'm going to skip a few steps in the paper and assume that we've already been appointed, we've been inducted, we're already serving on the board, and we ask companies what strategies do they have in place to retain the valuable non-execs. And they indicated that the board works towards creating a culture of inclusivity, of tolerance and respect as their key retention strategy. So this will enable new non-executives, and of course the rest of the board as well, to function to the best of their abilities right from the get-go. Our board culture is incredibly important. So even though you may have met some of the board members at the interview, you can still tell a lot more about board culture from the chair of the board. So before accepting the position, if you have not met the chair of the board as yet, make sure you set up a meeting and have an in-depth discussion with him or her so that you can assess if this board is going to suit you too. Is it a well-functioning, agile, effective board? Or is it malfunctioning? Is it stagnant? And does it have autocratic leadership? And if you have a really good professional network, then ask around about these potential new colleagues. Remember, they're checking up on you and you have every right to check up on them too. Sometimes I think we get a little too excited about being offered a position and we don't take the time to make sure that it is a good fit for us as well. The second most popular retention strategy is to evaluate the board's performance and, of course, each individual member's performance as well. And companies use the strategy to ensure that there's balance in terms of contribution and value add, and, of course, an opportunity to root out the destructive members of the board and those that are clueless, all these being very burdensome to the rest of the board. There are a few things that board members need to remember or need to do to remain relevant. And this is, of course, apart from not doing anything illegal or unethical or reckless or negligent. And that is to keep up with developing your skills and knowledge, to keep learning about the company and the industry that it operates in, and to prepare extensively for meetings over and above just reading the board pack. Some of the other strategies that they used to hold on to good board members was providing market-related remuneration, sponsorship of professional development. Mentorship was not as prevalent as I had hoped. It could be that directors who are suitable mentors have time constraints, but also I've come to understand that they see new entrants to the market as competitors as well. So to conclude, I would like to revisit the goal of the presentation, which is to support ethical and competent individuals in their quest for board membership. The horrific examples of governance failures that we currently experience means that this particular goal is more relevant than it's ever been. We find that bad governance is destroying economies, it's destroying societies, it's decimating our natural environment, and we need responsible leaders who have qualities that are just not negotiable. They need to be independent, they need to be ethical, knowledgeable, skilled and active directors. They need to exhibit a diversity of thought and experience and demonstrate courage in the boardroom. So let us strive to be those directors. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to listen, and I really hope that these insights have helped a little. We will now go to the Q&A session, and I will have a look to see if there are any questions out there for us. Okay, so there's a question from Osman, which says, what are companies doing to ensure succession? Many adverts say previous board experience, which is obviously required because that's important, and that in itself is very limiting. So companies themselves don't necessarily promote a succession plan for board members from within the company, because if they're looking for independent, non-executive members of the board, they're not going to find them internally. It has to be independent, as in members of the board that come from outside the company. But there are a couple of things that you need to do in order to ensure that you obtain experience. Firstly, you can volunteer on a non-profit board. This is to gain the experience that you might need. Remember that non-profit boards tend to be non-remunerated, and we need to make sure that even though it's a non-remunerated position, we still need to be very diligent in how we serve on these boards. The second thing you could do is that if you offered a chance to serve on a subcommittee only, so you're not on the board, but you are serving on a subcommittee, you should take that opportunity as well, since it will expose your value to the rest of the board. Also, if you've reported into a board on a regular basis as an executive, or you've provided board support in some way, you must make sure you emphasize that in your CV, because it is an important duty to have fulfilled in providing that support to the board. Okay. what is your view? This is Patricia asking, what is your view of tasking the CEO with shortlisting of candidates? Does it not defeat the objective of appointing independent, strong, and ethical candidates? Yes, definitely it does. There is, as far as the literature is concerned, and as far as King 4 is concerned, is that the CEO must not be actively involved in the appointment of the non-executive. If required, if invited to do so, the CEO may come and sit in on the interview process, but cannot be actively involved in the decision making. So usually there is some curiosity from the CEO as to who is being considered, but the CEO himself or herself should not be actively involved in choosing the board members. In fact, the committee, the nomination committee, should be dominated by independent non-executive directors. And full approval of the appointment, the final appointment of the director, should be done at the full board as well, with as little interference as possible, if not any interference at all from the CEO. Okay, so I'm just looking through.
Sorry, Ven, to interrupt.
Yes, that's okay.
Our attendees, if they would like to ask a question live, they can raise their hand using the raise hand functionality on the menu bar, and I'll allow them to speak. So while you're looking for your next question, anyone can do that, and then we can take some live questions.
Okay. So Sylvia asks, in terms of the criteria used, does the issue of age count? If so, what is the preferred age group? This is just my personal opinion and some of the research that I have looked into. Age doesn't feature much. There is some resistance to appointing individuals that are, oh gosh, how could I say this, a little older than everybody else. So anyone who's probably 70 and over or older. There isn't a limit on the youth side of it, but obviously the limitation comes in with experience, because you have to develop that experience. But we've seen young members of boards in their 30s and over. Clearly, it's all about contribution. It's all about the skills. What are we lacking? And in this day and age where we're looking at issues of cybersecurity and digital issues, and maybe some of the younger members are far more appropriate to be on a board to help address those risks, then so be it. But the key thing is the contribution factor rather than just the age.
Then we've got Melanie. I've got a few of our attendees that have actually raised their hand this morning.
Oh, so, okay. Sorry, I missed that. If you can help.
No problem. Shall I ask maybe Melanie to ask her live question before we move on to the further ones that have come through. So Melanie, I don't have your surname here, but if you can please unmute your mic and you can then ask your question live.
Thank you, Vikeshni. I hope you can hear me. Just thank you for the presentation, super informative. A quick comment, and that is, if you do have the privilege of getting yourself through that superior club that currently dominates the board circles, bring your friends at the IoD who've gone through the certification course, etc. Bring them along with you on the journey. And then my question is really around, I've just seen over the course of the last 3 to 4 months how boards have had to step up and become more and more involved given the pressure that is bearing down from a COVID-19 perspective. And I've seen how important it is for a board to be both strategically and technically competent. My question really is, I've from first-hand experience, how important it's become for the board to not get stuck on a quarterly, we only do quarterly board meetings over this time. And secondly, non-executive directors have become more and more involved from a day-to-day operational perspective, which is starting to blur the line, I guess, from a corporate governance perspective. But I think is currently the difference between a company surviving and a company not surviving. Is this a slippery slope, or do we just accept that is what this time is calling for, and we do whatever we need to do in order to make sure these companies survive?
Thank you very much, Melanie. Yes, definitely a slippery slope, but at the same time, when one truly understands the difference between governance and management, and there is, for all intents and purposes, a brick wall between the two, is the way I like to envisage it. So that there is, the board truly understand it, that it is there to provide direction and oversight, and management is there to implement and to fulfill the strategy. And if we fully understand that, then there usually isn't a problem. The slippery slope comes in when the boards begin to interfere. Members of the board now want to actually start helping to manage the company, and that is problematic. It is never the intention for the board to manage. And the management of the companies know the companies much better than the board will ever know. They know the insides and outs and the details and all the little implementation avenues that need to be taken. They understand what it is that needs to be done. What the role of the board in this time is to support companies. And yes, there's a lot of round robin issues that are going about. Non-executives needs to be far more available during this time. But it's really about saying, how do we add value to the strategies that management is actually coming up with? How do we contribute by providing the necessary support without actually doing the management side of it? You'll find that there's a lot more resolutions that need to be signed. We need to be available to be able to do that so that it's done quickly and effectively, especially during a crisis, but steering the company rather than managing the company. And I think you'll find that good boards that know this even before there's a crisis know how to handle it and handle themselves during the crisis as well. Do you want to do another hands up, or should we go back to questions?
I can do so. I see, Mark, you've got your hands raised, so I'm going to allow you to speak. Please, can you unmute your mic?
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Pillay, and good morning, Vakeshni and everyone. Dr. Pillay, so I've observed that applying for INED positions has not been as effective as me slowly but surely engaging in networks and conversations and with other fellow directors. But I relatively am a junior director in terms of having 2 positions, non-profit positions, voluntary. And although I'm experienced in business and have special skills, I've definitely found there's a really big gap between having completed your certifications, between putting together your experience and getting quality board positions. And I guess I'm wanting to ask, the question is, your advice around improving your ability to traverse that gap to paying and quality board positions that can really have long-term impact. So the interest I have is being on boards that matter, and but I find if I apply by resume, as one does, you virtually never get a response.
Yes.
And perhaps an observation also to IoDSA that I really think there is a post-certification gap around mentorship and active mentorship that slowly identifies potential future board members for positions and puts them forward, rather than simply putting out adverts for board positions, most of which never get a response. Dr. Pillay, maybe your observations or advice around that, I would really value that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. I absolutely agree. You'll find one of the first things that is mentioned in the paper is that the positions come through networks. It's so unfortunate that if you do not have a good professional network, especially amongst other board members, it is incredibly difficult to get the positions. And as I also mentioned, because they're not advertised, we don't know about them, so we can't even apply. the few that are advertised, it really does feel as though our applications have gone into some kind of digital nothingness. I've experienced this just as much as everybody else. It is incredibly difficult. The first thing I want to say, Mark, is don't be despondent, because the process does actually work incrementally. As you grow your network and as you grow with experience, you will find that the the opportunities will open up. That's the first thing. The second thing around the certification, which I'm going to leave Vikeshni to address some of the issues around the certification, but just to bear in mind that training and knowledge is not enough. So there is a massive divide between theory and practice. And experience, yes, is highly valued, because one of the many comments that stuck in my mind in writing this report, and it was a comment from one of the respondents, is that the board is not a training ground. And they're absolutely right. As I said, it needs to work like clockwork. Everyone needs to know what they're doing and how they're doing it. You do need to, unfortunately, gather that experience. And I did it in many ways through also following your same path of working with nonprofit organizations. And then making sure that you structure your CV in such a way that you're not being apologetic about the fact that you are working with nonprofits and that you're not remunerated. There's a lot of strength and power and experience that comes from the work you're already doing. Do not water it down to make it sound as though it's less of an experience because it's not with a big company and it's not remunerated. That's the very first thing. Because one can't help but feel that you should be doing that, but you shouldn't, because you are gathering a lot of experience. As I said, I don't know if Vikeshni wants to say anything around the certification side of it and what needs to be done in assisting those who are achieving certification.
Sorry, Ven, can you repeat what was Mark's question around the certification? I was replying to all of the questions on the other end here.
Sorry, Mark wanted to know about the exposure that individuals who are achieving certifications, perhaps through the IoD around board directorships, what is being done to support those individuals to obtain exposure as members as well. I hope I summarized that properly for you, Mark.
Yes, I think this has been a topic on our agenda internally that we've been discussing for some time since we started the Certified Director designation. And Shama Malan, our executive that looks after this, has been looking into how we can help our designees get more exposure. At this point, it is, I think, attending the networking, it's applying for the vacancies. As you mentioned, it's about assisting, I think, the nonprofit companies and smaller organizations by giving your time there to get board exposure and experience. Because as a new individual with no experience, this is the best place to gain that exposure, because large companies will be unwilling to take somebody without any experience at all. I know somebody's mentioned about mentoring. We are looking into those aspects, and we're trying to find a solution of how we raise the profile. I know a lot of the public sector and departments that we are in consultation with are looking at making those designations that we offer higher ranking in terms of when making appointments, because it does speak to someone going through a process and actually understanding what their roles and responsibilities are. So those are all aspects that we are talking to at the back end. I don't have a clear answer as yet as to how we actually put you in a boardroom, because that is a personal, I think, matter as well, where the board ultimately is going to be the one that needs to make the decision as to whether or not they feel you would be appropriate onto their board. So we don't have that control. Then while I'm on, I've seen a lot of people at the moment in the chat group and on the Q&A have asked about coaching around CVs and preparing themselves for an interview. And I'm sure you've got some comments on that, but I'd just like to add from an ID perspective, we do have a one-day open program called So You Want to Be a Non-Executive Director. And we have launched one-on-one coaching for NEDs specifically around this arena. And that open program and the one-on-one coaching aims to look at your skills, identify where potential skills gap experiences are, review your CV, help update that CV from a board level versus a more executive or management level CV, as well as helping you with your elevator pitch and preparing yourself for an interview that you may possibly have coming up. So we do have those services available for both our members and non-members. It is on our website. I think I do reference it in the report potentially, and it's on the slide as well. But if anyone is interested, they can email advisory@iodsa.co.za, and I will send them the information around those programs. So just to, I think, answer that questions that are coming up. So then I'll hand over to you again if you want to look at the questions on the Q&A. There's quite a lot.
All right. Yes, so I have a question from Fungai, and he says, isn't it considered rude to interact with the panel when asking questions? Isn't it better to ask questions at the end when the panel is done? Fungai, usually if it's a normal interview, then it would be, but even at a normal job interview, I would still ask questions because that's just who I am. I don't think and consider it rude at all, because you must remember you're there to show how you can add value. So if you start discussing issues, so usually what I find is that companies like presenting scenarios to you and saying, and it's usually based on what's actually happening in the company anyway. And they'll ask you, well, what do you think? Because they want to see what kind of value they want to add, you can add to them. And you'll find that the best interviews I've ever had, and it is not an interview, it's a discussion, is that it gets so intense that you end up standing around a flip chart or standing around a whiteboard and you actually brainstorming rather than actually being in an interview. And you can't help but feel as though you're enjoying yourself, you feel comfortable, you're enjoying the interaction, and this is what they're looking for. But basically, the interview is an opportunity to set up what it would look like and feel like if you were actually in the board meeting itself. If you're going to be a job interviewer or interviewee and you're there patiently listening and answering questions and it's back and forth, it doesn't really feel as though you are then able to truly express your value add and how you can contribute to the conversation itself. As I said, the best kind of interview is where you get so involved in the issues and you have such a good discussion and they actually appreciate some of the insights. And believe it or not, they sit down and they start making notes and saying, actually, we want to discuss this with you even more later on. But unfortunately, we have more people to interview, but we're going to contact you and chat to you about this. Then you know that you actually, they are on your side already. You've already won them over because it's not about just them having standard questions and them firing you with these standard questions. They actually want to know, the most important thing is what kind of person are you? And what value can you actually add to the company? And you must use this opportunity. It will be the only opportunity you have to actually show them this. And then they're going to be interviewing everybody else. And if you just did the back and forth question and answer session, then it really doesn't make you stand out from the crowd. So Fungai, I hope I answered that for you. I'm looking at a question from Valanathan. He says, should board appointments not be for a fixed term to encourage new thinking and perspective? What you'll find is that a lot of companies tend to have a year-to-year contract, or because it needs to be voted on either by the shareholder or by the rest of the company. It's because they want to actually see what it is that goes on from year to year. It's very rare to get very long fixed-term contracts. And then absolutely, it should be about new thinking and new perspectives. As I said, you have those board evaluations and individual evaluations that go on. And I think if I remember correctly, King 4 indicates that board members should not serve for more than, is it 7 or 9 years, if I remember correctly, so that there is this regular rotation. Because then if you have served for too long, your independence comes into question as well. You pretty much become part of the company and you don't start to think as independently as you used to. I'm just looking to see what else we have here. Are there any specific skills, academic backgrounds that come up as more in demand for board positions? So there is a huge move towards not having just your traditional corporate skills. Sorry, this was a question from Khotso. It's not, as I said, a move towards looking at other perhaps non-corporate skills, non-traditional corporate skills. It helps sometimes to have some scientists on board, some social scientists, some engineers, and you actually find that when you do have people from different types of academic backgrounds sitting on a board, the discussion becomes far more valuable, far more, you get far more different perspectives that come to the table, rather than perhaps just the legal point of view or a financial point of view or an economic point of view. So there is a move, obviously depending on the industry. Companies might feel that they actually do need maybe an engineer or two on board. It depends again on the industry and the risks and the needs, or they might need to have some social scientists because they have huge labor issues. It depends, but I would definitely encourage that there needs to be different types of academic backgrounds sitting on the board as well. Fungi, it looks like you're becoming my favorite person. How best can one prepare for an interview besides reading the latest annual report? So what I would suggest is, apart from reading, and they should be the integrated report if they do have one, read at least 2 to 3 years worth of integrated reports for the company. I know it's a lot of work, but it's better to put in this work now and then feel a whole lot more safer and confident at the interview. So you read the integrated reports, you read about the industry. If it's not an industry you're familiar with, go and read as much as you possibly can and focus on what are the risks and challenges that this industry is facing. Importantly, if it's an international company, you want to look at the international context. If it's a South African company, look at the South African context so that you understand have a holistic idea of what this company is faced with. So now you know the context and you know the company itself. And then very importantly, as I said, also go and have a look at the roles that are being played by the people who are going to interview you. So if the CFO is going to be there, make sure you understand the financial issues that this company has. If the risk officer is going to be there, know the risks backwards and forwards. Just understand their key strategies, their key risks, their key challenges, anything that you know is of interest and concern to them that you can then actually say, hey, look, I actually have experience in this, and I know that in your industry or in your company, you mentioned X, Y, and Z. This is how my experience or my qualifications or whatever it is that you've done can actually play a role. But even over and above that, it would be absolutely amazing if you can actually talk about some solutions that you might have in mind for those issues that they are raising. I'm terrible. When I go to an interview, I actually go as far as doing a 2-page PowerPoint printout where I have mapped the company, I've mapped their issues, I've mapped their risks. And if they raise something in the interview about a particular risk or challenge, and I know about this risk or challenge, I don't hesitate to pull out this page and pass it around and say, actually, I looked at this, and here's some of the possible issues that I think, or the ways that we can address it. And those are the most, as I said, the best and most fun interviews, because then we all jump in on those issues, we're all talking about it, we're all standing around brainstorming. It is just no longer an interview, but you know, based on what you've just said and done in showing them what value you can add, that you've actually won them over.
Then I see we've got a lot of questions here, and we're almost.
No, I can see that. I don't know how we're going to get through them all.
I think you've answered a lot of them, because a lot of them are quite similar. There's one I think that might be nice to answer, given that we're going into Women's Month now in August. But I see I've still got quite a few hands raised. Do we have time? Can I ask one more person to maybe ask their question?
Yes, I don't mind at all. I'm good to go if everyone else is time-wise.
There's Molebonge, I hope I've said you're right. You've had your hand up for quite some time. So I'm going to allow you to speak. If you can please unmute your mic.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It's very insightful. So you mentioned that, you know, right at the end of the presentation that there are some non-negotiables, and some of what you said: independent, ethical, knowledgeable, skilled, active, critical, courageous. So I'm also just as the junior NED currently, and I'm sitting on only 2 boards, one of which is a manufacturing entity, and I was appointed by a shareholder. And I find myself always in heated arguments, you know, as much as you try to maintain your calmness and to not be emotional, always in heated arguments with the CEO, who often tries to impose decisions. So I found that the culture of boards nationally is of people that are very politically connected, not necessarily have the relevant qualifications or skills, people that are very autocratic, and it's very much male dominated. And when you're an under 35 young female, it's almost as if people expect, you know, a certain level of respect that is mute, you know, and that's how it's defined, mute from you. And because of my personality, I ask critical questions. I'm very independent. So I have found that these non-negotiables actually get you in trouble because of the culture that we're in here in South Africa. You know, often you don't get reappointed or considered for reappointment because you ask questions that people are not comfortable with. So now the question is, to get to the question quickly, is what are relevant non-negotiables for the South African framework of in the boardroom type of culture? You know, that, you know, as much you don't compromise your values, but, you know, if you still want to be in that board and add value, because if you're not there, you know, things will not be done the right way. So what are the tailor-made non-negotiables in South Africa?
Yes. South Africa, here, anywhere, these are still the non-negotiables, because the bottom line is that if these non-negotiables are getting you into trouble in the boardroom, can you imagine what bigger trouble you'd be getting yourself into if you don't adhere to the non-negotiables? Because these are the things, you see, it's because people do get intimidated. They do become dominated. As you said, from a cultural point of view, from an age point of view, people want to slap you on the head and tell you to sit down and be quiet. But that's not your role. And you can't allow yourself to fulfill somebody else's cultural requirements, which means that you need to be quiet or subservient if you're a female or if you're so young or whatever the case might be. Because at the end of the day, it is about the duty that you have been appointed to perform. And you are there to serve the best interest of the organization and for their key stakeholders that are going to be impacted by the decisions that you're making. So all of these should weigh much heavier on you. And so you need to, and I know it's difficult, to actually try and push aside the cultural requirements that people do impose on you because, as I said, you're a woman and you're younger. One of the ways that you can actually use to try, or means to try and address the issue, so always try and move away from the personality. You have to not fight personalities. What you need to do is argue based on the issue at hand. And one of the best ways to do it is that if there is something difficult that's happening at the board, and you find that other members of the board are looking awkward, they're looking sheepish, they're looking as though they're also feeling the discomfort you're feeling, and they're not necessarily agreeing with the dominance that's going on at the board, is that you need to find a way to get these individuals on your side. And one of the ways to do that is you can request that at the next board meeting, or if whenever you have an ad hoc meeting that is so often being called at the moment, if it's urgent and it's really important that needs to be addressed, is you need to sit down and think through the issue that is really bugging you that needs to be addressed. And as I said, it had nothing to do with the personality of everyone else on the board, but the issue that is impacting the company. And you sit down as an independent thinker, which is something you mentioned just now, and it's something that you can critically unpack, is try and put together a way, whether it's through a PowerPoint presentation or whatever the case might be, to unpack this issue that is of so importance to the board. So you sit down and logically and calmly unpack it, put it on a presentation, and request for a 10-minute slot at the board meeting where you can present this as clearly as possible. And you do it in such a way that people begin to understand what you're trying to say from your point of view and why it is so important. And you will end up bringing them onto your side of the argument because you have now clearly expressed and unpacked the issue and unpacked the problem, and you've presented whatever you think the possible solutions are, so that people can see the logic. Whereas the guy who's just sitting there saying, no, I disagree, or I'm unhappy, or whatever, but he hasn't actually put anything on the table, who is the rest of the board going to go with, especially if the rest of the board have also fulfilled the characteristics of being independent, ethical, knowledgeable, etc., etc. Please do not compromise the non-negotiables. I don't mind where you're sitting, whether you're sitting in an SOE or a private company or sitting in another country. These are the non-negotiables. You need to have them. We need to have them for good governance. Do not compromise on them. Rather spend time fighting and arguing the issues and ignoring the personalities that are trying to hold you back. I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you, Ven. And I think one last question, which was asked by Sibongele. She said, you mentioned the Old Boys Club network, and she wanted to know, as a woman NED, and I think from your personal experience, Ven, how can women break through this glass ceiling? So I think let's maybe end with that question this morning, given that we're going into Women's Month in August. And if I can let everyone know, there's lots of questions. I have mentioned in the chat group that a lot of the questions have been answered, I think, in the report. I think we do actually answer a lot of this there. So please go read that. And I will look at the questions asked and see if maybe we can do a bit of an FAQ, as there's quite a commonality on what's been asked in the Q&A box. So Ben, let's end with that question and then I'll end off the session.
All right, thank you very much, Sibongela, for the question. It is an absolutely very difficult position to attain. When you finally do get to that board position, you realize how difficult it was to get there, because there are people who actually do try to hold you back. And from a woman's perspective, what I did find is that, and also from an introvert perspective, because clearly networking is incredibly important, and if you're an introvert, that's incredibly difficult to do. But you need to be able to get people to try and introduce you to what is known as the right people. And even when you do meet these right people, and it's been very unfortunate, because being a director was never part of my career goal or my plans for the future or anything of the sort. I actually only started striving for these positions because I got frustrated with the people that I was actually dealing with on board. And very specifically, my area of specialty is the Social and Ethics Committee. That's what I want to be involved in. And I found that because this committee is seemingly a soft committee, and we all know it's far from that, people were deployed or delegated to serve in these positions, and they themselves had absolutely no idea what sustainability was about. It had no idea about environmental issues and what have you. And that was my reason for actually starting to say, look, I need to actually serve on a board, because I'm tired of dealing with the people who are there but have no clue. And what I found is that when we are introduced very kindly by some of our network to the right people who could perhaps open a door or let us get our foot in the door, they tend to be sometimes very duplicitous. There is a lot of elitism. There is a lot of snobbery amongst the general inner circle when it comes to directorships. There is a lot of personal insecurity. There's competitiveness. As I mentioned, a new entrant would be seen as a competition to individuals who are there already. It is a massive battle, and it is a massive battle for women of color. It is a massive battle for women in general to be able to get to these positions. The only thing I have no solution for this. The only thing that I can think of is that we need to continue networking. We need to continue just improving our skills and knowledge, improving our ability to actually respond to the calls for directors, and especially at the interview. The ultimate solution to all of this, and as I mentioned, is that it's going to take an impressive amount of work. It's a massive amount of work and will require a lot of leadership from whomever decides to run with this, is that we need to start advocating for the appointment processes to be open so that anyone who is suitably qualified can apply. It needs to be transparent so that we can all actually see what is going on and make sure that the right people are chosen. And it needs to be formalized. Once it's formalized, it means that it is going to be monitored and it needs to be reported on. And if we can make sure that we can do that, if we can have this collective that looks at open, transparent, and formalized nomination processes, I think this would make a huge difference to making sure that the right people actually are appointed to the board. But this is something in that perhaps the IOD needs to look into as to keeping the ball and running with it. I'm sorry I couldn't give you a direct answer, Sibongile, but it is very difficult. All I can say is please keep trying and don't give up.
Thank you, Ven. Unfortunately, we've actually gone 10 minutes over our time. I know this is a very topical subject, and there's a lot of our attendees that would like to answer questions. I do apologize for not being able to answer everyone. Ven, thank you so much for presenting the session today and sharing with us your views and your practical insights as an actual NED. And thank you very much from our side from the IoDSA for helping us on this project and letting us put out this report that we've sent out. I think it's an excellent report with some valuable insights. And I really do hope everyone does download and have a look at it. And if they've got any questions, they can contact either of us around the report itself. So Ven, thank you so much. And thank you again, once again, to all of our members and other attendees for supporting our Boardroom Bites at 9 sessions. It makes me very happy when I see the comments to say that it's been informative and helpful. Please do take your time to take our survey and recommend any other topics that you would like to see in the future. We will do our best to try and answer the questions that have been raised going forward, either individually or through a collective frequently asked question document. So look out for that. And thank you once again for joining us. I'll see everybody again next week. Thank you, Ven.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.